Hey friend, grateful you're here. I did a bunch of reading challenges this month, which means that there were subsequently quite a few books that were read, so let's do a reading wrap up. I feel like I have to sit very still because it is very hot. Oh my god. But I feel like I say that in every video as of late. Hi, how are you? How's it been going? How's your summer been going? So in the beginning of the month, I went upstate and did a little reading retreat with Ivana and Kat, and so that was a little bump in my total books read. Then I just recently finished another video, which I'm not sure if I'm posting before this or after, but I tried to read 100 pages a day for a week, and that also really just catapulted not just like the number of books I read, but also got me into the habit of reading more, which was kind of my aim with that challenge. So that was really helpful. So yeah, so we did read a bunch of books and we're gonna talk about them. The first book we read this month was Chain Gang All-Stars. I described this book as an abolitionist's Hunger Games. It takes place, it seems like in the future, and you essentially have an alternative to a life sentence in where incarcerated individuals can sign themselves over to this almost gladiator type of entertainment. So they essentially fight to the deaths, only one person can leave the stadium, and it is broadcasted in a very consumable sports way. And I think for me, what was being explored in this book was humanity, who we assign humanity to, how we value human life. There was talk about every life being precious, and if every life is precious, then how can you sort of metabolize the cruelty and the inhumanity of this sport despite whatever a person has done, because life is precious. So it was a difficult book to read. I remember sitting on this couch and holding my breath and then just weeping, because it really did show so much tenderness and so much vulnerability, and it really worked to humanize people who have not always made right decisions. And I mean, granted, there are some characters who are in these games who have not done anything wrong, so it very much mirrored our current like incarceration system. Throughout the text as well, there were these little footnotes that were sort of calling attention to actual people who are wrongfully incarcerated or incarcerated for reasons. So they mentioned like Centoya Brown and some other individuals, just how each individual stretched towards maintaining their humanity in these games was heartbreaking. Very affecting book, excellent book. This is my first book by this author, and I was watching a talk by him at one of these like bookstore events, and I fell in love. So I might be picking up Friday Black, not anytime soon because my TBR is quite intimidating right now, but I do really want to prioritize picking that work up. So that was Chain Gang All-Stars. Excellent book. Highly recommend. I used to say that like I don't have a broad strokes, like I recommend this book to everyone type of book, but that officially has become my broad strokes. I will recommend this book till my dying day. So okay, so the next book I read was Dykette by Fran Davis. This one I chatted a little about at the reading retreat, and essentially it was a look at all of these different queer couples and how they embodied gender performance within their relationships. Dykette was also looking at desire and how sort of mangled it can become when you attempt to dictate someone else's desire. I think in the beginning I was very much on board, and then it started to come apart at the seams for me a little bit. Towards the end, I did feel a sense of like I just want to be done with this book, and then it got to a place, and I mentioned this before, where there was like this green ribbon and they were sewing the green ribbon onto a buttocks as like commentary on femininity, and it was just a lot for me. I know there's a bunch of mixed feeling about this book, so I'm very excited to continue to keep an ear pressed to the conversation, and I feel like if you want to read it for the conversation, I think it's worth your while. I also on that trip read Paradise Rot, which I have not been able to stop thinking about. So this young girl moves to this new town. She's looking for somewhere to live, so she moves into this loft with this roommate Carl, and then in this home that she moves into, you sort of see the boundaries disintegrate. And to me, initially, it felt like a love story. There is this constant disintegration of boundaries within the story. So we see one of the characters peeing on another person's pee, and just the way that they live and the way that their environment sort of begins to wriggle and come to life. There are all these organisms that sort of invade their living space. So yeah, it felt like, I mentioned this before, like, but how consumptive first love can be. But then the more I was thinking about it, the more I thought it might be a ghost story. As the story goes on, we learn that the loft that she has moved into is haunted. We see her friends start to express concern about her because she seems a little weird and a little bit withdrawn. And then just the things that happen within the apartment feel very hazy and very hard to pin down. We also, when we see characters interact with our narrator, we don't ever see them interact with both the characters, and it is described as a horror, and so I wasn't sure. I think my question, and my question still remains, is that if it is a story about a woman living with a ghost, what does it mean? For me, I think I'm going to keep it as a book about how you can sort of lose yourself and lose your boundaries and lose your edges in these like very human experiences, like falling in love for the first time. So a very beautiful book. It's a very short book and it moves very quickly, and it was a very of the senses type of book. So it was a very enjoyable, or maybe I wouldn't say enjoyable, but it was definitely an experience. So that was Paradise Rot. We also read Cockfight by Maria Fernanda Ampuero, and this was a short story collection. It is described as a domestic horror, and it looks at women and how when a woman goes from girl to woman, all of a sudden that threshold is one of a loss of safety, and we see the lack of safety coming from men. The stories are very insular to the family dynamic, and so a lot of the trespasses that we see are committed by fathers and brothers and different family members, which I think adds a level of absolute terror to the stories. There are a few stories that really stand out to me because of this crossing the line. But yeah, the opening story is about this woman who gets into this taxi and is sort of abducted and taken to this auction. All of these people are sort of auctioned off, and in order to protect herself, she soils herself. So then we see how individuals try to protect themselves and how difficult it can become when the danger is coming from inside the house, so to speak. Yeah, very affecting story. I feel like this would be one that I would also think about constantly, except I think I immediately blocked it out because I was so disturbed by it. But it's definitely one that I have kept because I want to return to it. It was very, yeah, I get like physically uncomfortable when I think about that book. I also read The Late Americans by Brandon Taylor, and this was a book about several different people who live in this Midwestern university town. They are all trying to explore art, explore relationships to one another, figure out what it is to live a meaningful life. And then it was also exploring these ideas of cruelty within relationships, aesthetic anger, and how sometimes our outward sort of beliefs can be very progressive, but then when we are within private spaces, we don't always maintain those politics or those positions, and we can oftentimes be very cruel to one another. But like a book that was looking at how we inadvertently harm one another, the fact that we are all housing harm, just trying to make sense of what life is. Also read small little, it was technically a textbook, but it was called Women at Point Zero by Naval El Saadawi, and this was a book about a woman who goes to a prison to interview this woman who's about to be executed. So the woman's name is Firdaus, and she recounts the events of her life. She is going to be executed because she killed a man, and so the story starts from the beginning, and we sort of see how the men in her life have constantly, repetitively violated her. She's been at the hands of so much violence. There have been a lot of men who come into her life under the guise of support and well-intentioned and then harm her. We see her turn to sex work as a way to empower herself and find safety, and then I don't want to spoil anything, although it's nonfiction, so what are you spoiling? But when she does finally achieve this level of like actualization and someone tries to violate her, here her response is to unalive them. Heartbreaking, important, highly recommend. Okay, then we've read Sacred and Profane Love Machine by Iris Murdoch, and said this in a video before, but I'm not sure I got that book. That book is about a man who has a marriage and he has his mistress, and we see sort of his life with both of these women. We see the dynamics shift once the affair comes to light. The mistress is trying to assert her presence in the man's life. We see all of these different iterations of love. So a lot of the characters are quite withholding with their love, and then we have a lot of the characters who are very, very effusive with their love. For example, the wife, when she finds out that her husband has this whole other family, shows up with so much love. And in her approaching the scenario where the response that all of us would have would be absolute rage, she shows up with so much love. And in that sort of deluge of love, we see control and power. So for me, it was just how sort of love ebbs and flows and shows up differently, and how also when we move through the world, we unintentionally injure those that we hold dearest. For me, it was a portrait of that. Definitely very funny, very enjoyable. The dialogue was so fun to sit and experience. It was super theatrical. The twists at the end had me full on screaming and the ending broke my heart. I shed a tear or two. It was like definitely a roller coaster of experiences. So if you're looking for anything like that, I would point you towards this book. Really enjoyed that one. Also read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and this book. So in this book we have two writers, one Asian American writer called Athena and another white writer called June. Athena and June are cool. They're celebrating Athena's success. Athena is just killing it in the publishing industry. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't say that. She's really high achieving in the publishing world. They get together to celebrate a Netflix deal and Athena dies. June says, you know, it would be really cool if I steal her manuscript. So she steals her manuscript and then passes it off as her own. So in the beginning, we're seeing like all of these decisions that June is just sort of like foregoing, especially when it comes to like cultural sensitivity within the manuscript. She tries to make it very accessible and digestible for wide audiences, and that's just so cringy. There's a ton of commentary on what it is the publishing world is looking for, how quickly people can go in and out of success within the publishing industry. Also a ton of commentary on reviewers and people who engage with books, how we engage with books. And then something that I thought was really interesting towards the end was this exploration of inspiration. I've been reading a lot about inspiration. So I did mention before in my other video, but The Bad Art Friend was an article that I found so fascinating, because when you're living a life and you're collecting all of these experiences, is it okay for you to write about someone else's experience, even though that's a shared experience? How do you sort of claim ownership over inspiration? Elizabeth Gilbert has this book, Big Magic, where she talks about how inspiration can sort of jump from person to person. So if it goes to one person and they're not receptive, or if it's the wrong time, then that inspiration will take that idea and go to someone else. So I always think about this. I also just picked up The Creative Act by Rick Ross. That sounds wrong to me. Is that his name? I'll put a correction here if that's wrong. And he was also talking about that, how you have to be receptive to it, otherwise it will find someone who is. And so this idea of who can claim ownership over amorphous creative things I thought was really, really fascinating. Towards the end, I was very stressed. I thought it was a great, fun, propulsive read, especially if you engage with books online in any capacities. Y'all, my whole camera just overheated because it's so hot in my apartment. But yeah, so that was Yellowface. Last book, I'm almost done. The last book I read was Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren, but I will put a correction here if it is not. This was a book about I did not like this book. We have Elliot and I don't even know chick's name. Oh God. We have Elliot and his chick. They are best friends from when they're little. She has this like closet that her father has turned into this library. She was a child without a mother. Her mother had passed away. Elliot was the only one who really understood her. And so it's all of these dynamics with her and her father, and then Elliot being really one of the only people who she felt safe around. You can tell that they love each other, but something happened and they're no longer together. And so the whole book we're moving, it feels like Happy Place, where we're moving from the past to the present until we meet at the center. And yeah, it just felt like two real codependent people being codependent together. I think I have a personal sort of resistance towards not communicating, like just talk to each other and we would save ourselves like an entire book. So not my favorite, but this was also like a romance and that's not really my genre. So that was an experience, but yeah. So those are all the books that I read in July. Tell me what your favorite book of the month was. Tell me how your reading month has been going. I feel like from what I've seen, we've all sort of been collectively in a little slump. So let me know if you were also experiencing that in May and June, and if July was a little bit better for you. I'm excited for August. I feel like I've done a bunch of these reading challenges. I'm hoping that I can take all of the habit building that has been done in July and apply it to August and forward. But yeah, I think that's it. Bye.